Hi, Madam Horton, and I'm back for the second video in my series on how to teach and play Dominion, the card game. In the first video, we played our very first game of Dominion with a 5-card kingdom, and hopefully this introduced our new player to the mechanics of Dominion. Now, this kingdom is actually pretty specifically selected. It doesn't have to be these exact 5 cards, but there are certain concepts in these 5 cards that I feel are important to represent, and then also there are other things that I think are important to wait until the second game to represent. So before we play our second game of Dominion, let's go over what those concepts are. The first thing that's important to do in the first game is to expose them to all 5 of the vanilla bonuses. +1, plus cards, +1 action, plus buy, plus money. And then I consider a 5th vanilla bonus to be +2 actions. I consider that to be different than +1 action. I mean, you can explain them in the same way, but having a card that gives you +2 actions and also a card that gives you +1 action, I think is important to help them see a variety of action cards. So that's a thing. Another thing that I think is important to expose them to is some sort of interaction and also something that makes it matter that you draw your 5 cards at the end of your turn instead of the start of your turn. So some players will decide, oh, well, I'm not going to draw until the start of my turn because I'd rather pay attention to what you're doing. And it's important that you're sitting there staring at your 5 cards, so the militia makes that matter. Council Room also will work for this because it matters that they draw and add to their hand. So that's why this is here. That's the important part of that. And then also, something that makes them discard in the middle of their turn. So I've chosen Oasis because it's actually the most simple card other than Baron that makes you do this. So Baron and Oasis are just fine. But if you've only got the base set, Cellar's just fine. You can discard, and that's okay. There are a lot of mechanics that I've chosen not to introduce in the first game. And that's just because we want to get playing as quickly as possible, and we don't want them to be thinking about too many mechanics when they're still learning that, hey, I have to place my treasures on the table in order to play them, and when to shuffle, and you know, what the right order to play your action cards is, and that kind of thing. So let's talk about the mechanics that I wait for the second game to introduce. And now we're going to take these 5 cards and add 5 more cards to get like a full game of Dominion where most of the mechanics we care about are introduced. So let's take a look at some cards. The most common question I get is, hey, why are there curses on the table? When would you ever want to buy them? And the response I give for the first game is, well, I mean, you usually don't. They're pretty bad. They do nothing. They're worth negative points. On the other hand, sometimes you want to buy them. There are exceptions to pretty much everything in Dominion, and then I point at the massive box of, 250 cards, and like that guy. I point to that and I say, we'll get to it. There are plenty of opportunities for it. And they'll usually arrive at the conclusion that there are attack cards that give curses to your opponents. And so let's talk about Witch. Which costs 5, gives you 2 cards, and makes everyone else gain a purple. So, purples are really bad. You want to give them to your opponents. Witch does that. So, some of these attacks, Militia and Witch, are getting kind of nasty, but there are ways to defend against them other than just getting them yourself. So let's start out with Moat. Moat is a $2 action, gives you 2 cards, but it's blue and it's a reaction. So what Moat does is if you're sitting there staring at your 5-card hand, and you got a moat on it, and some jerk across the table plays a witch on you and wants to give you a purple, you can say, hey, not today, bucko. I got a moat. Go have fun with yourself. So that's what moat's for. The thing is, moat, while it's useful, you can still play it to draw 2 cards, it's not going to stop the attack unless you draw it in your starting hand and you're looking at it in those 5 cards. So 1 moat might not do the trick. There's still a chance that you might not draw the moat, so maybe you want lots of moats, but you don't want a million cards that play +2 cards because they'll collide, blah, blah, blah. So, that's one way to play Defense and Dominion. Another thing you can do, so let's talk about Chapel. Chapel says trash up to 4 cards from your hand. So trashing is really, really good. Obviously, if someone gives you purples, you want to trash them. So Chapel will do that for you. Now's the time to point out that trashing and discarding are different things. With Oasis, we wanted to discard cards, but they were still in our deck. They weren't really gone because we would shuffle and we would see them again. With Chapel, you trash them, meaning they're out of your deck, they're removed from the game forever, of course with exceptions. But yeah, they're totally gone. So you can get rid of curses, but remember how I said these starting 10 cards were all bad? Yeah, you can get rid of those too, and trashing is really, really good. It's like the best thing you can do in Dominion. So Chapel's a really good card, because you can get rid of all of your bad stuff. And then there are two more concepts that I like to introduce in the first game. So something that makes you gain a card without buying it. So Workshop says gain a card costing up to 4. The difference between playing this card and buying a card is the fact that you can just play this card, gain a card, and then you still get your buy phase. So this is another way, besides plus buy, that you can gain more than one card per turn. And so you just explained that the difference between buying and gaining is when you buy a card, that's one way of gaining a card, but there are other ways of gaining a card, like playing a Workshop or something else. Finally, I like to include a Kingdom card that is not an action card to demonstrate that, hey, there's other things going on. They could be treasures, they could be victory cards, they could be other ways to score points. So I throw in Gardens. Gardens if you have a big deck, if your opponent's been throwing a bunch of purples at you, well, maybe get some Gardens and the Gardens are worth more. It's still not as good as not having the purples, but hey, it's something. So now at this point, we go ahead and we play this game with the 10 cards with all of the trashing and attacks, and there's actually an engine viable on this board. So what I do normally, one of two things happened in the first game. In the first game, sometimes your new player will buy a whole bunch of action cards, try and chain action cards together, and they learned a lesson about big money, saying, oh, hey, big money's pretty good, I need to play focused. And so sometimes after that, their second game, they will decide to play something big money related. In that case, I'm going to observe what they do, and I'm going to try and do the opposite. So if they're playing big money, I'm going to go for an engine where I draw my deck. And that engine where I draw my deck involves opening Chapel, probably pummeling them with curses, hitting them with a militia every turn. I really want to demonstrate that, hey, engines really are good, look at all the fun I'm having, it's possible, but you have to be focused about it. You know, if your player's not that competitive, maybe I'm going to go lighter on the attacks, but something along those lines. Another thing that can happen in the first game is they see I'm playing big money, and they just kind of mimic what you do, only a couple turns later, and they buy more action cards, but still not that many. A lot of times they're going to try and mimic what you do in the second game, in which case an engine mirror is fine, but if they're going to go for the engine regardless because they see fireworks here, then go ahead and play big money and get crushed by them, because that's a really good thing to have happen. So, second game of Dominion, these are the mechanics that we introduce. We've waited until the second game to introduce these mechanics, I think for very good reason. So I really like having the second game after a quick first game to learn, where you can introduce these other things. And then at the end of this, you can start to show off some of the victory cards or the treasure cards that you didn't use here but are still Kingdom cards, you know. This gives them a chance to see what's out there. And really, when you're showing off other Dominion cards, like you'll explain the mechanics, like you might get out of duration or something. But each card that you bring out, with the exception of Scout, you should be able to have them tell you why that card is good, or when that card would be good. So, that's the second game of Dominion. Normally at this point, I will, depending on how quickly they pick up on this stuff, sometimes I'll just throw them into full random and introduce the mechanics as we go. Other times I'll, start with these 5 and add 5 additional cards that introduce mechanics gradually, sort of read the situation there. But as far as my videos go, I'm going to stop talking about teaching the game now, and in the rest of these videos we're going to talk about strategy. We're going to go from the basic and we're going to go as high as I feel I can authoritatively talk about. And yeah, so hopefully you enjoy that, hopefully you stick around, but thanks for watching.